and started playing that rock and roll music. Any old way you choose it. It's got a backbeat, you can't lose it. Any old time you use it. It's gotta be rock and roll music. If you wanna dance with me, if you wanna dance with me, don't care to hear 'em play a tang.
Chuck Berry was one of the founding fathers of rock and roll. He combined elements of blues and country into a new style, and he was particularly known for his incorporation of guitar solos, and unusually wrote most of his own songs. His first hit was Maybelline in 1955, and he continued to have a string of hits until the beginning of the 60s. After a short spell in jail, he returned, but his popularity faded somewhat. He had become a nostalgia act. However, in 1972, he had his only number one single with My Ding-a-Ling. He was from St. Louis, Missouri. He died in 2017. He recorded 20 studio albums in his lifetime. More than half of those were in the 60s. And the last one was recorded before his death, released after. Hi, my name's Dan. So this was Chuck Berry's second studio album, and it's my first time listening to it. But I knew a couple of tracks from here, which is probably not surprising. I knew Sweet Little 16, which is the first track, and one from later on, Rock and Roll Music, probably know even better uh, from that. And it surprises me a little that um, this is the first Chuck Berry album that I'm reviewing from this list. Maybe it's just because all his albums are higher up. We'll see. I can't remember. I have reviewed Chuck Berry albums before. Before I was doing video reviews, I had a blog and I was using a different list. And there's maybe a couple of albums on that list. I can't remember. It was a while ago now. So to my mind, this is as a collective album. It's unusual in some ways, particularly for the time. Okay, so what I usually do is I listen to an album, then I do some reading, then I listen to it again, and I've done that in this case. And one of my major sources is Wikipedia, because after all, everything that Wikipedia says is absolutely spot on the money. No, because it's a really easy place to get summaries of stuff. Wikipedia remarks that all but 5 of these tracks were things that have been released on 45 RPM as singles, um, and seemed to kind of give the feeling that this was maybe an unusual thing. I don't think it was. So because this was 1958. So excuse me. So LPs, really they're coming through in about 1956, 1955-ish. Is where they're starting to become really quite popular, 55, 56. Before that, there were albums, and some of them, I can't remember exactly how long actually LP format was around, but albums before the LP format were literally a kind of a book of 45 RPMs, or even before that, 78 back in the day. And so they started basically as being a collection of the singles that had been brought out. And the single was the primary thing, kind of, uh, up until the middle of the 50s. And it wasn't really until we got into the 60s, actually, I think, that album sales became a really significant thing compared to single sales. Anyway, where am I going with this? So this is 1958, and this is what albums were. They were kind of collections of what been released as singles at this time. And I think that this is somewhat unusual. We're kind of getting into more thought of how to structure an album and putting some stuff on that is additional to the single releases. But that definitely has this feel in that it's a collection that isn't just the singles here. It's not all rock and roll as well, so that might be maybe somewhat surprising if what you know of Chuck Berry is that he's a rock and roll artist. There are some blues, there's some instrumental. Again, that was somewhat unusual to mix instrumentals and non-instrumentals on an album. There's one with a Latino feel, but that's not unusual. A lot of people were doing 1 or 2 tracks with that kind of feel. There is another anomaly here, which is that Blue Feeling, which is a track that's near the beginning of the album. and Low Feeling, which is a track that's near the end of the album, are in fact the same recording, but the second version of it, the Low Feeling, as it's played slower. So they've slowed the tape down to play it. Is this just a way to get an extra filler track in here? I don't know. Was it being lazy, or did they just go, do you know what? That's really good. I like that. And this is kind of the start of, I guess, Doom Feeling. Maybe. No, I'm stretching a bit too much. My favourite track on the album is probably the track Reeling and Rocking. Sorry, Reeling and Rocking, which has a repeated hook of, I looked at the clock, it was such and such a time, and then something else which is going to go and rhyme. And it's you kind of think, how many of those can you do? And he just keeps doing it over and over again. And his clock goes from 9:21 all the way to something nearly 10:30 in kind of 10-minute or other intervals. And it's, yeah, I enjoyed that. My least favourite track probably on the album is How You've Changed, which is a more slow song. In the kind of rock and roll era, often I find that the slower ballady songs, of course, a ballad actually technically means it's a story song, but those slower songs, I find them less interesting often than the faster rock and roll songs. And this is true in this occasion. Um, I've always rated Chuck Berry. His rock and roll music at the time was commercial pop of its day. Somehow his has more durability than most. There's just a kind of there's a something to it. It's not an integrity really. It's just a little bit more something to it musically, I think, in the way that it's played, and maybe it's just his love of the music that's coming through. So I enjoyed this as an album compared with modern albums. It is somewhat disjointed still, but there has been some thought put into its makeup. We're kind of starting to get this idea of a structured album. Slowly is going to take place over the next few years after this. So yeah, all right. Not bad. That's what I think. As always, I really, dearly, absolutely, please tell me what you know. I'm laying it on too thick. I'm sorry. Leave me a comment if you feel like it. Yeah. Let's be cool about this instead. Fine, right. That's it from me for now.